you sent out an email to your constituents the other day in which you talked about the threat of communism, and that's we've just been hearing all about that from James. There it is, right over the skies of America. And you quoted Margaret Thatcher saying that communists, you know, they're always there, the danger is always there, they just change the way they appear. And that springs to mind the World Economic Forum and that whole Davos crowd who want us to eat bugs and own nothing and be happy about it. Sounds very communist to me. So, Alex, wanted to chat to you this morning about the threat of communism. Talk us through it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rowan. Thanks, everyone. Look, that actual balloon is amazing timing in the end, really, because it sort of almost highlights the point in a sense. That Margaret Thatcher's quote was, as you said, she said, communism never sleeps, it never changes its objectives, and nor must we. And she said that in 1979 to a group of students in the United Kingdom. And it was prophetic because, of course, they were still around about 10 years before the old-style communism actually collapsed with, you know, the Tiananmen Square and the fall of the Iron Curtain in Europe and so on. I think what we saw from there, though, was the Chinese Communist Party in particular learning a very, very harsh lesson about where their future lay. And so they really did embrace the market. What we're seeing now, though, is the tentacles of that movement moving through global organisations, governments all over the world, and all the way through that ideology appearing into our schools, into our universities, and, of course, into our corporations as well. And this is the one that I think people miss all the time. You know, woke corporations didn't just emerge out of thin air. They emerged because there was a push on to make them do this. And we see that through the language of the World Economic Forum, this concept of stakeholder capitalism, which really is just communism in drag. What it's talking about is this idea that businesses and corporations don't just have to make money, they have to do social good as well. Well, since when? I mean, you know, like since when literally their obligations under, you know, the Corporations Act here in Australia, for example, are to return dividends to shareholders and so on. So this is a completely new concept, this concept of environment, social and government, this idea that what the corporations are there to do is to do good. The themes of communism are all through that. We're seeing it now, the breakdown of the family unit. We're seeing it, you know, these gender and diversity divisions that are taking over corporations. Rest assured, this is not being done because corporations are such great people. It's being done because there is a push on to drive this ethos through the Western world.
Rita. And these ESG guidelines and goals that companies are expected to abide by now, it would be good if it actually did do good for the community, yes. But it's not. It is this very warped view of the world and making corporations fit into that, and any different thinking, any deviation from that is deemed unacceptable. It really is something that you would not expect to see in the private sector.
No, that's right. And I think that, frankly, the communist ideology has found out, and they learnt that lesson in Tiananmen, you know, that ideology learnt that lesson, that we have to do this a better way. And we're now seeing communists throwing away the Mao suit and putting on a three-piece Hugo Boss suit because corporations have more power than governments could ever dream of. And we see that with the corporate standover that happens through things like, you know, banks not lending to companies that don't have ESG targets, that insurers not insuring new coal developments or whatever it might be. And that's exactly right. All of those themes of socialist, communist, Marxist authoritarianism are now emerging in the corporate sector. So my message is this: if you're one of these prize dinglings that's got a Climate Action Now sign on your front yard, you're doing the work of the new communist movement. Rest assured, this climate stuff has nothing to do with the environment and all to do with control. And people have to make this connection, I think, guys, because that's really the issue here. For the political class, you'll be staggered to learn this. And we're about to go off to Canberra for another week and a half of this. Spend their days, you know, furrowing their brows and wringing their hands about the nuances and the intricacies of nonsense like The Voice, when the real game is happening every single day around us, and it's being taken through the boardrooms, and our country's being changed day by day because of this nonsense. People have to make the connection.
And Alex, what do you know? People sort of see woke corporates happening, and they sort of vaguely understand that's happening. But one of the things, when you start to scratch the surface of it, you find out that there's all sorts of agencies, you know, that are certifying companies for being woke in different areas, you know, environmental or around family leave, or, you know, indigenous reconciliation, and all of these companies are now fighting very hard to get these ticks, you know, in all of these sorts of things. What can be done? Is there anything that can be done from a prudential point of view to say, regulators need to ensure that these sorts of things aren't getting in the way of the bottom line, which is, of course, for public companies, very important?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole heap of things that can be done, and it pains me to suggest further regulation, but I think we're sort of almost getting into the world where we do need that sort of stuff. I've sort of thought for long and hard about the sorts of things that might be done to stop these companies from rejecting nation-building projects like Adani or whatever it might be. Look, I think politics does have to muscle up to that, and ultimately, people keep saying, oh, well, these are global forces, they're coming from boardrooms in Wall Street and whatever. Well, that's rubbish. There's no reason why Australia can't be a city on a hill with this stuff, like Florida was under Ron DeSantis, that changed the game through the stroke of the legislator's pen. What you described there, James, is actually really the very essence of a Marxist approach. It's sort of this central control of the free market, ticking off these various, whether or not you've got enough culturally and linguistically diverse people and all this nonsense. So, look, I think there will come a time, I think it's overdue. We just need politics to get it and to make it a priority.
So just quickly, Alex, many Australians, the parents of many Australians or people who came out in the post-war immigrants recognise, whether it's from Asia or from parts of Eastern Europe and so on, recognise the danger of communism. They lived it, they escaped it, they got the hell out of it. So there's a whole class of people in Australia who understand very, very well how dangerous communism is. They got rid of it, they ran for their lives. But equally, there's a huge class of Australians who have no idea, who think communism is kind of Joseph Stalin back in the 1930s. Yeah, right. How can we make people understand, just naive, gullible Australians, that communism is here and is threatening their freedom, their individual freedom, and replacing it with authoritarianism?
Yeah, look, it's so true. All through the COVID period, people that would approach me and would say, we've seen this before, with people from Eastern Europe, some people that had come from China, of course, that had sort of escaped the regime, and others. So to them, you're absolutely right, that the lessons don't need to be learned. But, this comes back to the problems we've got in our school system. And of course, this Marxist ideology has attacked the school system. It's attacking the family unit, the church, our institutions, and our school system. And so they're not getting taught about the problems with we hear on one hand that Hitler was a bad guy, which of course he was, and Lenin was a good guy, which of course he was not. So I think the problem starts with education, and that means shows like this talking about it as well, because I think people just haven't made that connection. But we've got to start with the kids. We're losing them through TikTok and all this other nonsense, and it's got to start with the kids.
But the kids, if the polling is accurate, a worrying percentage of them prefer socialism to capitalism. And surely, in part, that's the failure of our centre-right politicians, our so-called conservative politicians. You look at it in this country, they have dominated federally, and yet where has been the promotion of those values? It seems to be conservatives don't want to talk about the culture wars. It's almost dismissed as some trivial thing, as opposed to a really consequential issue about what your nation looks like and what its values are.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Rita, and I think it is time that conservatives really took up this mantle. I think there's an air of worry about the Twitter sphere and ABC with conservative ranks sometimes. I don't see it, because they're about like getting whipped with a limp piece of lettuce from where I sit. But, like the sky doesn't fall in. It simply doesn't. And so that is where it is going to have to be, because we have seen, as you say, the culture wars getting poo-pooed as being something that's a bit beneath everyone's dignity, yet the left fight with every fibre in their body, and that's why they're winning.